Welcome to Goldfish on Games, where a beginning can be a most delicate time. So know then that in the year 1992, a game dared transition from floppy disk to CD. It was an amazing game where you could take over an entire planet. One where the worm could be a danger or an ally. But oh yes, I forgot to mention, the name of this game is Dune. Simply known as Dune, it was made by Cryo Interactive and released initially in 1992. This was the same year that Dune 2 also got released, so the two do tend to get a little bit mixed up. So Dune sometimes goes by the name Dune the Adventure Game, just to separate it from Dune the RTS. The original release was on floppy disk for Amiga and MS-DOS. Then a year later a CD-ROM version was produced and released for the Mega CD and again for MS-DOS. I've got the budget release of the game, as the original tends to get quite pricey these days. More so if you want the absolutely incredible fold-out box version with that pop-up sandworm. Oh, I want that so much! The plan is to review the game while also looking at the changes they made between the floppy and the CD edition. And to make it easier, I'll be mostly focusing on the PC version. The CD version opens up with, surprise surprise, an FMV sequence, but this was taken from the Dune film, and is used for the very same reason as the film, to give much needed background to the story.
The spice exists on only one planet in the entire universe.
Interestingly though, when this finishes, it actually just then continues into the original game's intro.
That planet is Arrakis, better known as Dune.
Which does end up repeating many of the same points. But it does give us a few hints at the changes we can expect in the game, like the fact it has voices. And there's also some new video sequences. And once we're in the game we find out that everyone is voiced, and voiced quite well, particularly considering it's one of the earlier examples, even if some of the dialogue is still quite clunky.
I am the Duke Leto Atreides, your father.
And if we look at the options menu, and who wouldn't, we will find a newly designed screen, because it has a few new options, including having voices, subtitles, or both at the same time, which is an option that is actually missing from some talkie games. There's even a new subtitle option, Fremen. It's not all that useful, and I doubt it's even correct, but it is a fun little addition. The Duke, as we've already been told, is your father, and I'm not sure if somewhere between leaving Caladan and arriving on Arrakis Paul hit his head, as he barely seems to remember anyone or what he's even doing here. But after chatting with a few of the other people that surround the palace, you quickly get up to speed. And it turns out our first job is to find Gurney Halleck, which will require us to head outside. And doing this we'll find the second big change to this game, as they've now 3D rendered the outside of the palace as well as redone the whole planet. Some of the exteriors look much better, others I think are a little worse, so I can't say this is a complete improvement. Unlike the next change, which we'll get to see when we get into the Ornithopter. As once we're in the air and we get flying, we now find this animated sequence. It's thankfully not just one single video on a loop, as it does transition between a number of different sequences depending on what you're flying over, but this is in contrast to the older version that had this lovely perspective view with the dunes and rocky outcrops that were moving and scaling across the ground. And this was directly based on what was underneath you based on the map, so it far more closely aligned with the ground. Now I don't really mind those 3D animated sequences, they're fine enough, but I think it would have been a lot better if they had more of them. As ironically, in trying to make them seem far more interesting, they also stand out more, so you get a little bit bored of seeing the same canned animations over and over again. But to be completely honest, unless you're actually searching out for the seeches, you tend to just hit that skip button anyway and go straight to the destination. And it's at this place we find our advisor, who, like everyone else, likes to introduce himself as the first thing that he does.
Contact with the Fremen. The Fremen have always lived in the sands of Dune. They live in sieges.
And after chatting with him and then the Fremen, we quickly get them on our side, and they agree to work for you.
Yes, I agree to let my troops work for you.
And what else are they going to do right now but mine the spice? because the spice must flow. This will become one of the core things you'll have to do in this game. Find new tribes, try to get them to work for you, and then give them one of 3 different jobs, which we'll go into in more detail as we go on. And there's also a special 4th job that only one group of Fremen can do, which will activate after a little bit more adventuring and recruiting. As in every region of the game, there's a spice density, and this will only ever go down through mining, it can never go back up. Which is weird for a supposedly renewable resource, but I get the feeling this was mostly done to keep the game from going on indefinitely. And before you can mine an area, you need to find out what its spice density is, as you won't always know this up front. And that's when those prospectors come into play, and they can be sent to 3 different sietches to get the lay of the land. And as mentioned, there's only one group that can do this, so you better be careful with them. Now you might be wondering what all this spice is used for. Outside of expanding your consciousness, letting navigators fold space, and even allowing you to live longer and more healthier, its main use in the game is to send to the Emperor, who is a very demanding person.
I do remind you that I sent you to Dune to extract spice. So make the necessary arrangements. I will call you again very soon for the first shipment.
As you will get messages from him requesting a set amount of spice in a number of days. Don't have the reserves? Well, you'll be crushed. But if you have the stocks, you can just send him exactly what he asks for. But in a very cool bit of gameplay, you can also decide to send him more than he asks for. Now this will either be everything you've got, or 50% more. Now this will typically please the old man, who will then give you a bit more time until the next required shipment. So normally I would give him a little bit more each time, as it strikes a balance between getting more time as well as having some stock left over, as you can also use that spice to buy equipment from the smugglers. These can include harvesters, which will allow the Fremen to mine the spice faster, or even Ornies, that will allow them to spot worms and get away before they lose any equipment or workers. You can also give the Orni to the prospectors, which will allow them to move around much faster.
Okay, it's yours now. Well, let me see if I have something for. I have an Orni for trade. Here's my price for it.
Dealing with your stockpiles of spice ends up being Duncan's main job in the game.
Well, for the moment I haven't much to do. I hope that we'll be able to extract large quantities of spice very
And I do feel they've done him a little bit dirty in this, as he's a graduate of the Ginza School of Sword Fighting, and one of the best in the Imperium. And yet here he is, reminding us at every opportunity that the spice is the most important thing, as well as telling us how well we did from the day before. I know he became a Mentat in the later books, but right now they've turned him into a glorified accountant. Initially, you have to go and visit the various sietches if you want to talk to the Fremen. But as you go through the game, you'll get exposed to the spice, which will also affect your eyes. But more importantly, you'll also gain the ability to telepathically talk to all the various leaders.
Paul Atreides, we're doing spice. Here are the characters. Spice is harder to mine now. Show me where you want me to go.
With your range growing as you make it through the story. And there is a story here, which you might be wondering if it follows the book or the movie, and the answer is yes. As many of the characters and the world designs are based on the film, including our main hero, which was clearly based on Paul McLachlan. But that wasn't always the case, as we can see in early demos, Paul looked quite different. The game also includes the weirding modules, which like the film is a weapon, where in the books it was a fighting style. But it also includes some bits from the book that never made it into the film, such as Harara showing up, who doesn't quite play the same role as the books, but there are similarities. The game also adds in its own elements into the plot as well, such as the Harkonnen already being on the planet at the same time as the Atreides, and the fact that the Duke still dies, but it's in a completely different way to both the books and the movie. Overall, the story blends quite nicely into the gameplay, and tends to show up when you hit major milestones in the game, like finding so many Fremen sietches, or being directed to find someone in particular. But every so often you might find yourself a little bit stuck, and you won't be able to move on until you talk to everyone and work out what it is you need to do, which sometimes is just getting someone to follow you to the right room. or you might accidentally trip over a hidden trigger, and it will move the story on when you weren't expecting it. Now normally when these story heavy parts end, you'll find out that there's new areas of the planet that you can go and explore, which does allow you to further build up your forces. And it is a force that you'll be raising, as you get the ability to give the Fremen a new job: military training.
There's nothing like military training. Have a look at the characteristics of my...
Now much like the Spice, some troops have an affinity for fighting, and this helps determine their starting level. But you can raise this up much faster with the use of your companion, Gurney Halleck, as you can leave him with some troops and he'll whip them into shape and get them to level up much faster. You will also need to give them a range of weapons, from the basic Chris knives, all the way up to weirding modules and eventually atomics.
Oh my god, atomics.
These groups also get the ability to go out scouting, to find enemy bases. And the longer you leave them doing espionage, the more information you'll find out about the enemy's numbers, as well as how well trained and how well armed they are.
We are doing espionage. Have a look. We've seen Wadib. We have found the toughest Harkonnens of all. We are doing military. Show me where you want me to go.
But leave them there too long and there is a good chance they might get captured. But once you have that information, it's a good idea to try and send your forces up to fight them.
Have you seen? Show me.
And this information is great for helping you decide where and when you should attack.
Okay. We are doing. Show me where you want me to go. Okay.
And while all of this is going on, the story will continue to unfold, with you being introduced to Chani, your love, and who will be your main companion for most of the game. Well, there's a little bit of new story that will take her away for a while, but I'll let you discover that for yourself.
Oh, this is so...
But you'll also be invited to drink the Water of Life.
We also have little quantities of the very special water of life.
And if your charisma is high enough, then the end result of this is you've been able to talk to any tribe across the entire map, which makes it so much easier to keep track of what's going on. You don't have to keep hopping around from siege to siege to talk to them. And you really do want to keep chatting to the various tribes, as doing so will help keep up their morale. Leave them too long and their productivity can drop, and they will moan about this as well.
Our production. Show me where you want me to go.
You'll also get the chance to meet the planetologist, Liet Kynes, who will unlock the third and final job for the Fremen, Ecology. These Fremen can build wind traps, and then plant special bulbs that will thrive with the water from the wind traps. And once placed, it will actually destroy any spice that's in that region. So you have to be very careful not to do this in an area that you've not already cleared out. Now these plants will actually slowly travel north, as long as they've got enough water, and can actually be used to clear out the Harkonnen strongholds, as they won't hang around in an area if there's no spice. You'll also get introduced to another way of travelling around the planet, via the Shai Hulud, the giant sandworm that cleanses the sand with his passing. Using these means that you don't have to use an ornithopter all the time, though they are much faster. But the big use for them is to go out to a difficult fight, as you can head up the battle and take command. If you tried to fly in there on the ornithopter, you'd get shot down instead. And doing this can help turn the tide of a battle. But if it fails, it can also lead to a game over. And there are many ways that you can lose the game. Wandering out into the desert too long, flying over Harkonnen airspace. There's also the aforementioned option where you don't give the Emperor what he wants, as those requests will keep coming as you have to balance everything else. And the game also moves along in its own real time, with days ticking over as you just sit there. And this results in the sun setting and rising if you're outside. And it does look absolutely amazing no matter what version you play. It's such a visual treat. And what's also a treat is the soundtrack. Both the floppy and CD editions of the game have the same music. There are some reports that the CD edition also got an updated CD soundtrack, but this is false as they just added more sound card support. But they did give you more options for the music order though, as you can get it to play the relevant track for the situation, play it in a set order, or have it as a CD style randomizer.
Look, the steel suits have...
The Amiga version got less tracks overall versus the PC edition, but those mod tracks are so damn good that you have to listen to them. And the music was so good that under the name Exos, the game's musician, Stefan Peek, and game director Philip Ulrich made the Spice Opera, which was an updated and remixed version of the songs from the game, and this is absolutely awesome. And while this was initially released on CD by Virgin, it's not been reprinted since EMI bought up the Virgin music label. And based on a quote from Peek, he has tried to get the rights back, but he's had absolutely no luck, which is a massive shame, as this should be everywhere for everyone to enjoy. Republishing issues have also hit the game itself, as it's not got a digital re-release. And it appears to be due to the fact that the Dune right holders don't really see any benefit in re-releasing an old game, which is the completely wrong thinking to take, as this game is as good now as it was back then. But amazingly, we almost didn't get this game at all, as it was cancelled by the publisher Virgin Games at one point. And if it wasn't for one of the Virgin producers believing in the project and secretly paying for it, that this game ever got released, as Cryo would never have had the cash to continue developing the game. And even when the ruse was discovered, they almost cancelled it again. And it wasn't until they got to see a great, if very rough version of the game, that they finally got to see that glimmer of magic that was there. And it was during that time that they thought it was cancelled that Virgin kicked off another Dune project, the one that would eventually become to be known as Dune 2. This really feels like something out of the books, with plans within plans, and secrets within secrets. It's the sort of crazy weird story that makes me enjoy this game even more, which is in many ways a bit of a love letter to the works. Because if you want to know more about the in-universe subjects, then all you have to do is open up the in-game Dunepedia. And you can look at all sorts of various terms and ideas. And if you got the CD version, you also get treated to a few extra cutscenes from the movie. And if you manage to do all that and avoid the few rare bugs, then you should find yourself finishing the game, as it's not the hardest title you'll ever find. And there are actually two main ways of winning, through military might, or by planting and raising a green planet, which is a great touch in a game that has so many great touches. Now, picking a version to play can be quite difficult, as I really do like most of the original artwork, as well as those travelling sequences, but I also really enjoyed that voice acting, as well as some of the bug fixes and improvements that are in the CD edition. If I could somehow combine the two of these to make the perfect version, I'd be very happy. But even with all that praise, that's not to say there's not some flaws in the game which can be quite annoying. Trying to find your companion if you left them in a siege can be a bit hard, with you having to visit pretty much every single one and going inside. I swear in one game I actually completely lost Gurney, as the seat he was in was taken over and he just wasn't there when we won it back. And that pretty much soft-locked the game, as you need to get all of them together if you want to finish it. It can also be quite fiddly keeping track of where your equipment is, as when you find a siege, they might have some random items in it. And if that equipment is needed by a tribe that's a long way away, you have to try and find them, move them over, and then update them, and then move them back. And that's if you can even remember where that equipment is, as you have to click on every single one to try and find what you need. But thankfully, those are pretty minor issues in otherwise an absolutely great game. So if you can't tell by now, I am a big fan of this game, and I could talk about it for hours, but I really felt there's a few things that you should discover on your own, so hopefully you'll give this relatively unique game a go. And also hopefully you enjoyed this doscember. It's been a lot of fun. So until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was the Blessed Maker and his water, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can let me know down in the comments, or you can use those buttons just below. You know the ones I mean. Or if you're not sure yet, then you can check out 2 other videos that I've done that are on the screen right now. So thank you again, and I hope to see you soon.